The laughter stopped so suddenly that the studio's sound engineer thought there was a technical malfunction. One moment, Ellen DeGeneres was mid-joke about Mother's Day gift disasters, her audience of 300 people roaring with appreciation. The next moment, complete silence. Not the comfortable pause of comedic timing, but the heavy silence that settles when something real breaks through the performance. It was Tuesday afternoon at the Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank. Ellen's Mother's Day special was being taped. The set decorated with pastel flowers and heart-shaped balloons. The energy was exactly what producers expected. Warm, celebratory, filled with the kind of joy that made Ellen's show a daily dose of sunshine for millions. But sitting in the third row, clutching a worn envelope in her trembling hands, was someone who would change everything. 16-year-old Sarah Martinez had traveled from Phoenix with her social worker, Mrs. Chen. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that hung loosely on her small frame, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that emphasized how young she looked. To the audience around her, she appeared to be just another excited fan. What they couldn't see was the weight she carried, the secret that had brought her across 3 states to this moment. The show had progressed normally through its first segment. Ellen danced through the audience, her signature moves bringing smiles to every face she passed. She interviewed a celebrity guest about upcoming projects, played a game involving Mother's Day traditions, and was building toward the heartwarming segment that always anchored her holiday specials. Now, Ellen announced, walking back to center stage, Mother's Day is about celebrating the women who shape us, who love us unconditionally, who sacrifice everything to give us better lives. The audience applauded warmly. Today I want to hear from you. Who's the mother figure that changed your life? Hands shot up throughout the studio. Ellen began moving through the crowd with her wireless microphone, collecting sweet stories about grandmothers, stepmothers, teachers who became surrogate moms. Each story earned gentle applause, creating the comfortable rhythm of shared appreciation. But then Ellen's eye caught something. In the third row, a young girl wasn't raising her hand. Instead, she was staring down at an envelope, her shoulders shaking slightly. Ellen had hosted thousands of shows, met tens of thousands of people, and she developed an instinct for recognizing pain hiding behind public faces. "Hey there," Ellen said, approaching Sarah's row. "You look like you might have a story to share." Sarah looked up, and Ellen saw something that made her pause mid-step. These weren't the bright eyes of an excited fan. These were the eyes of someone carrying something too heavy for her young shoulders. "I do have a story," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wireless microphone Ellen held. "But I don't know if I'm brave enough to tell it." Something in her tone made Ellen kneel down beside Sarah's seat, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. The cameras followed, but Ellen wasn't performing anymore. She was simply present with someone who clearly needed to be heard. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ellen asked gently. "Sarah, I'm 16. "Well, Sarah, sometimes the stories that are hardest to tell are the ones that most need telling. You traveled here for a reason, didn't you?" Sarah nodded, tears beginning to streak down her face. She held up the envelope with trembling hands. "I wrote a letter to someone I've never met, someone who doesn't even know I exist." The studio had grown quieter, the audience sensing they were witnessing something beyond entertainment. Ellen glanced at the envelope, then back at Sarah's face. "Would you like to read it?" Ellen asked softly. Sarah shook her head. "I can't, but I can tell you what it says." Ellen settled more comfortably beside Sarah's seat, no longer concerned with cameras or timing or any of the mechanics that usually drove her show. "I'm listening." Sarah took a shaky breath. "When I was 14, I got pregnant. I was scared, alone, and I had no idea what to do. My boyfriend disappeared. My parents, they couldn't handle it. They said if I kept the baby, I'd have to figure it out on my own." The silence in the studio was now complete. Even the crew members had stopped moving. Everyone focused on this young woman sharing her story. "I spent months trying to decide what to do," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "And then I found her, through an adoption agency. A woman who couldn't have children of her own, who had been waiting years for someone like me, someone willing to give her the greatest gift I could offer." Ellen felt her own eyes beginning to water. She'd been open about her own struggles with having children, the heartbreak she and Portia had experienced. But she remained silent, letting Sarah's story unfold. I lived with her for my last month of pregnancy. She drove me to every doctor's appointment. She held my hand during labor. She was there when my daughter took her first breath. And then, because I loved my baby more than anything in the world, I gave her to the woman who could give her everything I couldn't. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, but her voice remained steady. That was 18 months ago, and every day since then, I've wondered if I made the right choice. I've wondered if my daughter will understand someday that I didn't give her away because I didn't love her. I gave her away because I loved her too much to give her less than the best. Ellen reached out and took Sarah's hand. The gesture was instinctive, one human being comforting another. "The letter," Sarah said, holding up the envelope again, "is to my daughter's mom, to thank her, to tell her that she's given my baby everything I dreamed of and more, and to ask her if maybe, someday, when my daughter is older, she could tell her that her birth mom loves her, that she was wanted, that giving her up was the hardest and most loving thing I've ever done." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Ellen looked around at her audience, at her crew, at the cameras that were capturing this moment of raw vulnerability. "Sarah," Ellen said, her voice thick with emotion, "can I ask you something? Do you know your daughter's name?" Sarah nodded. "Emma. Her name is Emma." That's when Ellen stood up slowly, a strange expression crossing her face. She looked toward her production team, then back at Sarah. "Sarah," Ellen said carefully, "what's your daughter's mom's name?" "Jennifer Walsh. She lives here in Los Angeles. She's a teacher at an elementary school in Pasadena." Ellen's mouth fell open slightly. She turned toward her producers, who were frantically checking something on their tablets. One of them nodded at Ellen, confirming what she had suddenly realized. "Sarah," Ellen said, her voice now trembling, "I need you to stay very calm, okay? Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything." Sarah looked confused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Ellen walked toward a section of the audience that the cameras hadn't focused on yet. "Jennifer Walsh," she called out, "could you please stand up?" In the fifth row, a woman in her early 30s slowly rose from her seat. She had kind eyes, shoulder-length brown hair, and she was holding the hand of a beautiful 18-month-old girl with Sarah's dark eyes and Jennifer's smile. The studio erupted, not in applause, but in gasps of disbelief. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank back into her seat, staring across the rows at the woman who had adopted her daughter. "Jennifer contacted our show 3 weeks ago," Ellen explained, her voice breaking. "She wanted to surprise you, Sarah. She's been following your story through the adoption agency's updates. She knew you'd applied to be on the show, and she wanted to tell you something herself." Jennifer began walking toward Sarah, carrying Emma. The audience parted to create a path, many of them openly crying. As she approached, Jennifer's own tears began flowing. "Sarah," Jennifer said when she reached the third row, "I've been wanting to tell you this since the day Emma was born. You didn't just give me a daughter. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me everything I'd been praying for." Sarah stood up shakily, staring at the little girl who looked so much like her, but who belonged to someone else. "This is Emma," Jennifer continued, adjusting the toddler in her arms. "And every single day I tell her about her birth mommy. I tell her how brave you are, how loving you are, how you made the most selfless choice anyone could make." Ellen stepped back, allowing this moment to belong entirely to the three of them. The cameras continued rolling, but this was no longer television. This was life happening in real time. "Can I?" Sarah whispered, reaching toward Emma. Jennifer immediately stepped closer, allowing Sarah to touch her daughter's face gently. Emma, curious and unafraid, reached toward Sarah with small fingers. "She has your eyes," Jennifer said softly, "and your stubborn streak. She knows exactly what she wants." Sarah laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy mixed with overwhelming emotion. "Is she happy?" "She's perfect," Jennifer replied. "She's loved beyond measure, and she's going to grow up knowing that she has two moms who love her, the one who gave her life, and the one who gets to raise her." Ellen, who had remained composed through thousands of emotional moments on her show, found herself sobbing openly. This wasn't just a reunion. This was proof that love creates families in ways that defy every convention. Sarah, Ellen said, stepping closer to the three of them. Your letter. Do you still want to give it to Jennifer? Sarah nodded, pulling the worn envelope from her pocket. With trembling hands, she offered it to Jennifer, who took it with the reverence of someone receiving something sacred. I have something for you too, Jennifer said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small photo album, pictures of Emma, from every month since she was born, so you can see how she's grown, how happy she is. As Sarah flipped through the photos, Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. She turned to her production team and made a gesture. The cameras stopped rolling. This moment, Ellen announced to her studio audience, belongs to them, not to us, not to television, to them. The audience rose in spontaneous applause, but Ellen gestured for quiet. What we just witnessed, she continued, is what love looks like when it's bigger than ourselves. Sarah, you showed us what sacrifice means. Jennifer, you showed us what gratitude looks like. And Emma, she looked at the little girl who was contentedly examining Sarah's face. You showed us that families are created by love, not just by blood. Ellen walked to her desk and pulled out her checkbook. Jennifer, she said, I know you're a teacher, and I know that raising a child is expensive. I want to start a college fund for Emma. But more than that, I want to start a foundation for birth mothers like Sarah, for adoptive mothers like Jennifer, for families created by choice. She wrote out a check for $100,000 and handed it to Jennifer. This is just the beginning, because what happened here today, this is what the world needs to see. This is what hope looks like. But Ellen wasn't finished. She turned to Sarah, who was still marveling at the photos of her daughter. Sarah, you said you've wondered every day if you made the right choice. I want you to stop wondering. Look at Emma. Look at Jennifer. Look at the family you created through the most selfless act of love imaginable. You didn't give up your daughter. You gave her everything. Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out a business card. This has my personal number, she said, pressing it into Sarah's hand. Because what you did, what you're still doing, that takes courage that most people can't even imagine. And sometimes courage needs support. As the episode concluded, Ellen addressed her audience one final time. Today was supposed to be about Mother's Day, she said, about celebrating the women who shape us. And that's exactly what happened. We celebrated a young woman who chose love over convenience. We celebrated a woman who opened her heart and home to someone else's biological child. And we celebrated a little girl who will grow up knowing she was wanted by everyone who had the privilege of loving her. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with Ellen's permission to break protocol. The response was unlike anything in daytime television history. The show received over 200,000 messages from viewers sharing their own adoption stories, their own experiences with unexpected families, their own moments when love proved bigger than biology. Sarah returned to Phoenix, but she and Jennifer maintained regular contact. Emma's first birthday party included both of her mothers, and the photo from that day became Ellen's favorite picture in her office. The foundation Ellen started that day has since facilitated over 1,000 adoptions and provided support for countless birth mothers navigating impossible decisions. They call it Emma's Bridge, honoring the little girl who proved that love builds connections across any distance. And every Mother's Day since then, Ellen has dedicated part of her show to families like Sarah's and Jennifer's. Families that prove that the most powerful force in the world isn't genetics or convention or even biology. It's love that chooses to show up, love that sacrifices, love that creates bonds stronger than blood. Because sometimes, the most ordinary Tuesday afternoon can become extraordinary when someone has the courage to tell their truth. And sometimes, that truth reveals that the family we choose is every bit as real as the family we're born into. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years later, Sarah called Ellen with news that would bring everything full circle. She was getting married, and she had one request. She wanted Jennifer to walk her down the aisle. She taught me what unconditional love looks like, Sarah explained. I choose her as my mother too. At the wedding, little Emma served as flower girl, and Ellen stood as maid of honor, watching as love once again proved that the most beautiful families are built with hearts, not just blood. Ellen keeps a photo from that wedding on her desk. 3 generations of women connected by choice rather than chance. Because sometimes the most ordinary decisions create the most extraordinary families. And Sarah's story continues to remind us that when courage meets compassion, love has the power to create miracles. One impossible choice at a time.